Hi, I'm Dr. Emil Zakutny. I'm very pleased to join the RTS conference in London today via this video. Of course, it was my hope that I would be able to be there in person and meet the RTS families. Unfortunately, that did not work out. However, the presentation that I'm doing today, which is based on a similar presentation I did last year at the RTS conference, which has to do with coping with chronic illness, how it affects the individual child, and of course how it affects the family. So that's the nature of the presentation. I will be referencing some of my experiences from last year's conference with the RTS family, just to fill in some pieces that hopefully will make the presentation more relevant to all of you. So first of all, as a trained family therapist, let me explain a little bit about how to understand families. So one of the ways that families can be understood is through the idea that a family is a system like any other systems that we have in society. For example, organizations that do business and certainly provide a certain type of product typically have an organization or a structure that involves leadership, some supervisory level, and of course line staff. And there's a whole process that's in place about how people behave, what their responsibilities are, who they're responsible to, and so forth in order to accomplish whatever objectives that organization has. In a similar way, families function with the same idea. The leadership in the family, of course, are the parents, and they have a specific role. They function both as parents, they also function as a couple, and of course children function as a subsystem of that, and by that I mean that they're their own sort of system where they function as siblings to each other, and of course as children to parents. So the idea behind the family system is that there are certain rules, there are certain expectations, there are certain consequences, there are certain benefits, and that everyone has a role. They understand what the role is, and it maintains the system working in a cooperative way in order that everyone gets their needs met. So that's the idea when I say a family system. Now, chronic illness, by the way, just to talk about that a little bit, the hallmark features of any chronic illness, and of course some of the examples are something like cystic fibrosis, diabetes, epilepsy, and of course RTS, that the reality is that these are the types of illnesses that tend to travel in the course of a person's life, meaning from childhood to adulthood, tends to be something that's permanent and requires managing it at various stages in one's life. Obviously there are times that the individual is well, other times where in fact that the illness is needing to be addressed. So RTS is certainly in that category of a disorder that certainly has those kinds of implications. So if we start with the child that has RTS, as a way of understanding the impact, obviously there are things that come along with a chronic disease that can certainly put stress on a child, and of course just having a disease, getting treatment, feeling different from others. These are all things that in fact make the situation pretty difficult, or can make the situation pretty difficult for a child. And so in terms of thinking about that idea and addressing that, there are a couple of things that I would like to address. First of all, obviously any child with a disorder, the first place to start is to be able to certainly explain to the child what the disorder is about, specifically what some of the concerns that are likely to be present. For example, with RTS, there are a number of things I'm sure you're aware of. For example, like awareness that there may be a skin rash, there might be bone deformities, there may be any number of things that go along with this particular disorder. So a child needs to understand, and again, in account or in response to their age level, from the parents about what the disorder is about, and what the concerns that the child might have about the particular disorder. In the absence of knowing, the concern is that a child may in fact perceive some things in some, if you will, distorted ways. Children, particularly younger children, are prone to think about things being worse than they are, imagining things that certainly might be not in line with the reality of what, in fact, the disorder is. So the first place, as I said, is to be able to talk with the child, for the child to understand the disorder, the details of it, and to be able to talk openly and have any of their questions answered, both by the parents and, of course, the medical or healthcare providers that they're seeing. The idea there is that in knowing that information, it can and certainly be empowering for the child to have an ability to understand how the disease might be managed. So, for example, in the course of any disease, and RTS being certainly in line with that, during the periods that there may be that the disorder may be active, there may be a need for a variety of treatments, and that may include a variety of outpatient treatments, or may even include a hospital stay, depending on the nature of the circumstances. So in that type of situation, it would be important that beyond the understanding of the disorder, that when something certainly comes up as far as needing the attention of treatment or a medical professional, it'd be important to be able to guide your child with any information and all information really about what to expect. So, for example, if there is going to be a particular procedure, or there's going to be a hospital stay, it'd be important to try to talk realistically and openly about what that might be like, what to expect, and of course, more importantly, that you would be there, you would provide support, and certainly whatever the particular procedure might be, that if it might be uncomfortable or even painful, that it would be of short duration, and certainly some of that should be talked about with the medical staff that are involved, whether it's the doctor, the nurses, or the social workers, engaging them in the idea of being able to be helpful in terms of the child's concerns and questions. So in thinking about the first level about the medical part of it, that's one part of, I guess, coping with the illness. Some of the families that came to the RTS conference last year talked very openly and honestly about what's helpful, for example, as far as the medical part. And frequently the response was that most of the families have identified certain healthcare professionals that they were dealing with, a particular doctor or a certain kind of specialty, and in essence they developed a team that was accessed whenever the disorder was in fact needing attention. This seems to be exceptionally important as a way of dealing with the reality of coping with the stress around the illness, knowing who you're going to see, trusting the individuals that are providing the care, and potentially identifying one person in that team who is the go-to person in order to deal with some of the questions and concerns that may be coming up. I share that with you. You may already have that in place, or you may be struggling to get that into place, but certainly it would be important to consider that as one of the most viable way of trying to deal with the management of any illness, and certainly RTS specifically. So there's that part about the medical professionals. Beyond that, in terms of helping your child, there are, of course, other external things. For example, it would be important to address other people that are involved in your child's care. And that may be, for example, individuals who are their teachers, individuals who are involved in any part of their interest or hobbies. The idea, and certainly family and friends, the idea behind that is that in being able to openly talk about the specifics about RTS, that individuals who are in fact in charge or taking care of your child, if they have any concerns about where, for example, if they should include them in certain activities, or if in fact something is inappropriate because of the limits of the child, any other questions that they might have, it would be extremely important that you be able to clarify, and ultimately also to develop a strategy, potentially if there's some sort of a emergency or something urgent, so that in fact they know what to do if they're in charge of your child for that particular time. So we're talking also about establishing a team of people that are part of your child's life that could be and very helpful in being able to come to the aid of the child, and also to be able to be supportive and being armed with the information about what to do and how to understand RTS and in coping with the child while they're under their care. So those are areas that in fact have to do with, again, trying to develop supports and resources, and that's certainly one of the key ones. This too was something that was addressed quite a bit by the families at the last conference last year, that they also had to develop a series of resources, or at least some of the families, where they were able to in fact call on friends, family, and so forth to be able to be a support when there was a need that was identified. And that brings me to the idea of also being able to be clear about accessing help, that in these various resources that you might have and develop, beyond explaining what RTS is about and any concerns that they have, if they offer help, and specifically, certainly that's a wonderful thing. Sometimes people are clearly not aware of what kind of help is needed, and it would be helpful to think in terms of being able to help them understand and clarify what kind of help you need. And it might be something as basic as, for example, that they run an errand for you, or that they pick up your child from an activity because time is difficult for you. Whatever the circumstances are, it would be helpful to identify to those people that are part of your team or your resource support system, to let them know what your needs are, so that they can identify and ultimately respond to those needs appropriately. So in dealing with the first layer, which is the child with RTS, these are some of the strategies that might be helpful. The additional part to this, of course, is RTS is not just a physical, biological, if you will, illness. It is something that also affects the child emotionally, psychologically. So one of the other areas that certainly would be helpful for parents to consider and to understand is that children should be encouraged to talk about some of the concerns that they might have. So, for example, when an illness has a physical representation, meaning that it can be seen by others because there are some differences in the way that the child looks, that can bring about quite a bit of curiosity, and of course it can bring about some reactions that might be viewed by your child as negative. And so in that way it would be important to be able to talk to your child about any of the experience that he or she may be having, specifically how to, for example, address some of those things, and more specifically, if there are some potential solutions to that. So, for example, if it means that you educate, friends, family, and/or neighbors about, or teachers about the disorder, and so that they understand all the specifics of it, and in some ways help to broker perhaps the impact on the child. Certainly to talk to peers, the child's peers, to be able for them to understand what the disorder is about, to address their questions and curiosities, so that they too can understand and appropriately respond to the child. So these are areas that would be important to keep an eye on, and if your child shows signs of being distressed by some of the reactions and so forth, it'd be important to listen to his or her concerns, mostly to be able to understand what they are, and specifically to be able to address if there are, again, some strategies. And typically the strategies that are helpful, and I go back to the last year's conference, of the kids that were there and the families, and I think some of them you will see in the video that potentially I think will be shown during the course of the conference. The kids talked about some of their experiences, and they have to do with things like dealing with peers. And there were a number of the children that talked about. One of the most memorable ones was a teenager by the name of Michael, I think you may see him in the video. He was particularly straightforward about the way that he dealt with RTS. Since he was a child, he knew that he was different. For example, the thin hair, some of the skin rashes. He was very straightforward with his peers, and his way of coping seemed to be that he just dealt with it head on and responded to any questions, did not see it as an issue. Again, that's one of the ways that children cope, and he's certainly a courageous young man who, in fact, dealt with it this way. And of course, children vary quite a bit, and not everyone is going to approach it from that point of view. But the idea is to listen to your child, to be able to understand what their concerns are, and then ultimately to try to problem solve, whether it is that you help them with that, or whether that you guide them, that they themselves address the issue with their friends or their peers. So that's another area, again, that has to do with the individual child. As I mentioned, the family system is comprised of parents and children, and there are various roles, and it's not only the child with RTS that is impacted, of course, it's the family. So now I'd like to turn to the parents. Providing care for a child where there are periods of course, illness and demand on your time, your energy, and even on practical demands on things like finances and so forth, can be a very, very stressful situation. So one of the things that I ask you to consider, that while you're providing the care, that you too take care of your own needs. In essence, the most basic ones being, of course, that you get enough sleep, that you are in fact following a relatively healthy diet, that you eat regularly, and that you get some of the obviously social, emotional needs met by the kind of activities that you enjoy. And so one of the stresses in dealing with the chronic illness is that it has a tendency, in fact, for people to become very much, if you will, overwhelmed and preoccupied with the child and their concerns, and at times forgetting about the impact that it has on them. So in this area, I'd ask that you consider, from an individual point of view as a parent, that you not forget to have your own needs met. The idea there is that everyone is entitled to get their needs met. Everyone will largely function better if, in fact, some of their needs are being met, particularly during a difficult time where the illness is active. So things like, for example, if you enjoy activities, sports, or if you like to go to the gym, meeting friends for lunch, dinner, and so forth, it's important to find time to be able to do those things as an outlet for yourself. It's imperative that, in fact, everyone is going to need some relief, and so being able to do that on a regular basis would be extremely important, that you make sure that you build that in. And so now we turn to the other part of the system, which is the other siblings. The other siblings in a family system, like everyone else, are affected, and of course they can vary quite a bit. But the main thing is that, for example, if they're younger children, then they may certainly be quite confused about what's going on. And again, I go back to the basic idea about everyone, whether it's the external systems like the school system, the healthcare professionals, but certainly your other children, they also need to understand about the illness. They need to understand what it's about, what some of the symptoms are, and certainly what, some of the concerns that they specifically might have about what to do in certain situations and so forth. And so that, in fact, they are as clear about that as possible. Children have a tendency to take on perhaps responsibility and even think that they somehow contribute or cause something that is, in fact, nothing related to them. So it would be important, particularly for younger children, to understand that this is, again, nothing to do with them, but that they understand that they're part of a family where one of the members may occasionally be ill, and that they understand that, and they understand the particulars of it, and they understand their role. So it may be that at times that they might be involved, for example, in providing additional assistance. If they're older, they might be able to certainly supervise their sibling. They might be able to provide some relief in terms of taking care of some chores at home, cooking and so forth. If they're older, the idea is that they can, and by all means, be incorporated, but that is hopefully something that they agree to, and something that in fact they understand that they can move away from once in fact the medical situation is resolved and things are, if you will, back to relative normal. And so that the other children have an opportunity to be able to, in fact, go back to their roles, just like everyone else in the family system. And so that it's important that they too get their needs met, and by that I mean that sometimes in the course of providing care for an ill child, the other children sometimes don't get the necessary attention. So it'd be helpful to keep in mind that they too have their needs, and that you might hopefully be able to find some time for them, specifically one-to-one time, so that they can feel that they are connected to you, and that they certainly are just as special as the child that's ill, and certainly to incorporate them in family activities, and to do the kinds of things, if you will, that are certainly joyful and fun activities that they enjoy, family activities that in fact should be part of a regular routine once again the medical situation has resolved itself. The importance of having family routines can't be overemphasized here. Like I said earlier, organizations and systems work with the idea that routines and predictable, you might say, behaviors are part of that. It's a reassuring type of, you might say, experience, and in that way, when families go back to their relative routines, it's a restatement or a reinforcement of the idea that everyone, in fact, is in a safe place, and that they can function in an appropriate way. So routines like having, for example, dinner at a regular time, as I said, recreational activities and so forth, spending time with family, extended family, all of those things that you might normally do would be extremely important that you go back to those routines. If for whatever reason some of those routines cannot be maintained because of the nature of how perhaps a child's illness is affecting that, potentially new routines might be introduced. So for example, if a new routine needs to be introduced, it should be talked about openly, that this is a substitute for something else, and that this, in essence, over time will become the, if you will, the relative new norm for the family to be able to function. But again, the main idea there is to be able to maintain a routine that everyone, in fact, feels that they're able to function and feel comfortable. So that involves the children as a subsystem, as I like to refer to it. The other part of the system that requires attention, as I mentioned earlier, parents function both as parents, but they also function as a couple. And so it would be important that the couple relationship not be in any way diminished. And by that I mean that while the stress of, for example, dealing with an ill child and medical appointments and so forth can be very stressful, the reality is there needs to be a time for parents as a couple to be able to express their needs, and certainly to be able to have their own, if you will, routines to follow. And that can be anything from, again, trying to get together to do something as basic as taking a walk, to going out to dinner, movies, whatever, in fact, you enjoy doing. But the idea there is that it's extremely important to maintain those routines so that overall every part of the family system is getting their needs met. This is extremely important in order for the family to feel relatively comfortable and feel healthy, that everyone has a sense of how they relate to each other, how what their responsibilities are, and that ultimately when the medical situation or the crisis is stabilized, that everyone gets back to their roles. Children aren't expected to stay in their roles, for example, if they're providing additional support or care beyond the time that, in fact, that the crisis is managed, and that everyone has an opportunity to be able to, again, feel that they can go back to their if you will, normal sort of family life as quickly as possible. And as I indicated earlier, by normal I mean if new routines are introduced, whatever that routine, whatever those routines are, it'd be important again to introduce them and to I guess make them the relative new norm. So understanding the family's needs, as I indicated, is part of a way of trying to cope with the reality of coping with chronic illness. The main thing is that as the illness, particularly if it's active on a regular basis, tends to put more and more pressure, of course, on everyone in the family, and having a strategy where, in fact, the various supports that you have in place are called upon, where each member has some opportunity, again, for time to themselves, and each part of the family system, if you will, the parents, the couples, as a couple, and of course the children and the ill child, that everyone has a way of being able to access their needs, to be able to get their needs met, is an important part of coping, certainly for the long term. Those are certainly the stories that emerged from last year's conference about when the part of the conference that we call the Caring and Sharing Conference, people talking about, parents talking about, for example, their experiences, how they cope, how they were able to get through different things. They shared all kinds of experience, of course, sharing information about ways to deal with various medical things that have to do with RTS, sharing different, you might say, approaches. These were some of the ways that, in fact, everyone in the group was able to get some support and ways of, if you will, understanding how to cope. The other thing, as I begin to wrap up my presentation, is this is a unique opportunity for you as the European, if you will, RTS community, to be able to potentially also get one of the main benefits, which is so rare, particularly with RTS, because there are so few families and they're so scattered throughout the world that it may be difficult to have access to other RTS families. And that's such an important thing, not feeling alone, knowing that others are going through something similar, being able to potentially get support and help from them. It would be extremely important that you consider the possibility that as you meet through the couple of days of the RTS conference, that you might consider perhaps exchanging information. I know that you can access each other to some degree through the RTS website, but perhaps, given the technology these days with Facebook and Twitter and texting and so forth, that perhaps some of you may find that it'd be helpful that you communicate beyond meeting for the weekend, for the conference, and that you might in fact communicate on a more regular basis. I think it may be helpful certainly to you, and it may be helpful to those children that, for example, are old enough to be, or with your approval, can have contact with other RTS children. That was one of the other themes that was played out last year's conference, the reality about being able to, in fact, again, have contact, and there was a great deal of excitement about the possibility that RTS families could reach out to each other and could communicate and get support. So I encourage you to do that when, in fact, you have the opportunity, perhaps as you meet other families, so that you are, again, understand that you are not alone. Other people are certainly struggling with this, and they can be helpful to you and you to them, and that certainly would be a very positive outcome of that. Finally, just in terms of the stress of dealing with chronic illness, again, there are times where the situation may become more problematic, either for your child or for anyone in the family. So as a mental health professional, I certainly think it's my, you might say, responsibility to let you know that if significant changes are happening with any individual in the family, for example, their behavior has changed quite a bit, their mood has changed, maybe they're not sleeping well, they're not eating well, and so forth, these could be signs of some of the stress that might be manifested as perhaps anxiety or depression. It would be helpful to consider getting help for that individual through something more formal. For example, to see a therapist. You can certainly access referrals for that if you have contact with obviously medical professionals like doctors and social workers who can help you to get a referral. The idea there is that it can be a very, very helpful thing having someone to talk to who is independent of the family, someone who's neutral, someone that you can talk about anything that has to do with the stress of coping with a chronic illness. And sometimes that's difficult to talk, obviously, with other family members. So I ask that you consider that should there be a case where, or a situation where you feel concerned for any family member. So that kind of wraps up my presentation. I appreciate your patience in hearing my presentation, and I hope some of this will be helpful to you. And again, I encourage you to use the RTS conference as an opportunity to connect with other RTS families, and the hope is that you will find support through each other. Thank you so much. Again, I hope to see you sometime in the future.